Hi, good morning, sisters. Welcome to this week's episode of God's Grace for Single Mothers. Today, I will be discussing the topic You Cannot Have It All. You cannot have it all. This is such an important topic for us as human beings, basically, as parents, but even more importantly, as single parents, and again, more essentially as single moms. We have to talk about this topic because there are two things going on when we are single parents. We have an obligation to ourselves, to our personal development. There is an expectation that community has of us as adults, as well as parents. And then we have obligations to our children. And these obligations, they span so wide. And typically our human natural response for people who are responsible is to think, I can do it all. If I'm supposed to be at the soccer practice 5 times a week, I can do it. If I'm supposed to take them shopping 5 times a week, I can do it. If I'm supposed to participate in some church activities five days a week, I can do it. If I'm supposed to clean my house every single day, I can do it. And I can do all of this going to school and working and volunteering and looking good in the process and smiling all the time and just never losing it. So we have typically responsible people have this sense of I can do and willingness, to do their part, make things work. But the truth of the matter is, no matter how much you want to do all that you're supposed to do, you cannot do it all. And because you cannot do it all, you cannot have it all. And what does this mean? Is this a negative? I don't think so. Because nobody in the world can have it all. Because nobody can do it all. I'll give you certain examples. I remember when I first had my daughter, new mom, single mom, living alone with me and the child. I was nursing. Baby has to eat almost every 2 hours. There's no help around the house. I have to do laundry. You have a baby, you got to do laundry every single day. I remember being so tired one day, I couldn't do laundry and I couldn't do the dishes. And I remember feeling so guilty, and in that guilt, there was a lot of self-recrimination. I was just pounding myself as a failure and saying, look at my house, look at my dishes, they've been in the sink. I think it was over a day old. I think I had dishes in the sink 3 days old. And so I remember talking to my sister-in-law. She called one day and she said, how you doing? I said, I feel very bad. I feel like a failure. And she says, why? I said, well, I don't just have the drive to do all the things I used to do. I used to be able to keep a house spick and span, and now I can't even do my dishes for 3 days. And she says, who's policing you? Who's going to write you a ticket for that? She's like, you got to be realistic. There's certain things you cannot do anymore. And from that day, I started taking into consideration, what are my limitations? What's really going on here? Well, I'm going to tell you that those limitations did not disappear. They actually increased. I have become more limited in many ways than I could ever imagine. I used to be a can-do person. I could take on a lot of community tasks, community projects, in addition to personal work. I was like a robot, when it came to work and in school. But I realized with a child, I just couldn't move at the pace that I used to move before. And so now I had to make a decision because I had to slow down in order to take my child's life into consideration. And sometimes that meant opting out of things that I was really good at and things that would have really taken me higher. I opted out of those things. My career took a dive for several years And I remember being in the midst of people, in my own field, and just shutting up, not saying anything, because at that moment for several years I had not been active in those areas anymore, and people not even knowing that I was a qualified person, that I was trained, that I was educated, that I had a job and a career. So it was things like that I had to let go of. I had to instead turn my attention to what was more important right now. This child is here. I do need to take care of this child. This child needs me in ways that I can never imagine. And I had to realize that when you have a child, in many ways, whether we want to admit it or not, and for the very first many years of their lives, they come first and we come second or third. So I had to do that. Money-wise, well, that too. So many things you would like to afford, but we don't have the money for those things. We had to prioritize. And in learning to do that, prioritizing spending, I had to look to the scriptures for guidance. And one of the things that the Bible tells us is that the most important thing is to have clothing and shelter. And when it says clothing, it's not talking about designer clothes. It's just make sure that your kids have warm clothes for the cold weather, have the appropriate clothes for every season. And if you have shelter and you have food, again, God is not expecting you to have a T-bone steak on your table every day. They're just basic nourishment. Make sure your children are fed adequately and find the ways to do that. Then that's my obligation. That's what I'm asked to do, and that's what my responsibility is at that particular time. Keeping up with the Joneses, that's not for us anymore. Not for any parent, not even for any human being, but for you as a single mom, you just have to recognize that you cannot be in competition with other people at any point in time. Neither can you see yourself in a race with anybody at any point in time. Rather, this is an everyday, in-the-moment task that you are called to fulfill, and you're going to find ways to do it in a godly manner. So how do we do that in godly manners? So here, one of the first encouragement I want to share with you today, it comes from the book of 1 Corinthians. And one of my favorite verses, Apostle Paul. So he's talking in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 23. He says, I have the right to do anything you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. This verse has been a lifesaver to me, although it's my context as a single mom is not the context in which Apostle Paul used it. Nevertheless, it's great wisdom that can apply to us as single mothers as we seek to do the best job that we can for our families. It's that there's so many good things out there. Your kids will be so good in so many kinds of sports. I remember my daughter was an all-rounder. As a 2-year-old, there was not a single sport she put her hand in that she was not good at. She excelled in everything. And I remember sitting and saying to myself one day, no, we can't do it all. We got to pick one. Just one. One is good for you. So as we live lives as single moms, you got to look at your life. What are you committing yourself to? What are you committing you and your children to? No matter how good things are, how beneficial is it to you and your future, your children's futures? How beneficial is it to the everyday life, the success of the everyday life that you live? Because we got to be whole every single day. The success of every single day is what builds up eventually to the overall success in the future. If we're not properly managing our time, our schedules, our spirituality, our finances, our emotions on a daily basis, the future is not going to augur well for us. And one of the ways to do that is learn how to determine every single day what's beneficial. I will share one more anecdote on this issue, and then I move on to the next verse. So as single moms, it's obvious that a lot of us, our lives are really, really, we have a smaller unit of people to interact with because, single moms, it's hard to be friends with people who are not single mothers for all the reasons out there that we know about the marginalizations, the stereotyping, and things like that. So, of course, you're going to have a smaller circle of friends. And also, those friends, you guys are going to tend to lean more on one another. And so you're gonna call each other more. You want to spend each other time in each other's company more. But even in that, you have to figure out what's best for your family. For me, as a person who's an introvert, I know that the more interaction I have with the people outside, the more withdrawn I'm gonna be within my own household. And so I had to learn because my child needs access to me also. She needs me to be emotionally, mentally, and psychologically available. I had to learn to put limits on the time I spent interacting with people on the outside. For many years, I actually had a cutoff time on when I answer my phone. I used before cell phones came along, mobile phones come along, I used to unplug my phone every evening at 6 p.m. When she was a baby, just so that no calls were coming into me. And as time has gone on, I've also learned to just put a limit on my time. When I come through that door from work, it's family time and my phone is turned off and my whole concentration is on my child. So you have to figure out these things for yourself, what works. If you're going to be so focused on satisfying people's expectations of you on the outside, and then that comes to you being unable to be available for your children, whether emotionally, financially, spiritually, that's wrong. So let's go to the next one. What is the second a prop that the Bible has for us, and how we can navigate this life of learning to create appropriate boundaries and learning to select what comes into our life, what is right to do at this time and what is not right. So here again, Paul is writing to Timothy, and again, it might not be the context in which he wasn't writing to Timothy as a single mom. However, once again, I find the counsel to be very appropriate and useful for me over the years as a single mom. So 1 Timothy 6, verse 6. We're going to read from verse 6 to verse 10. It says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs." So here, I want to break this down a little bit. Like I said, it's not necessarily in the context of single mommery. However, it does speak to a lot of context we need to consider, where we have to learn the attitude of contentment. And I want to start with that issue of relationship. One of the biggest things that plagues us as single moms is having a co-parent. And that's something a lot of us don't want to deal with. We're scared to settle into that period of single parenting. We're scared to face a future where it looks like we're going to be the only person doing this difficult job, and with society not even cheering us on for many, many years. Well, I'm going to say something to you. Right here, right now, today, this moment, I'm going to advise you to come to terms with yourself as a single parent and be contented with that. Your ability to find contentment, to see yourself as enough, to see your household as enough as a single parent, it will give you such peace that will help you start to properly navigate the path of single parenting. A refusal to find contentment as a single parent, to be satisfied with yourself as a single parent, to be satisfied with your household as a single parent, could lead you to seeking to change that status in ways that would end up being detrimental to yourself and to your children. So I want to say start there. It's not by our grasping, it's not by our dissatisfaction with it. That's not what's going to change the situation. It is with you finding contentment in it that you're going to start to thrive and see God's power and God's grace for you and your family to overcome every single day. So when you read that paragraph, that passage, I don't want you to read it in terms of just money. I want you to read it in terms of all the things that tug at your heart as a single parent, all the ways where you feel you're not enough, where you feel your family is not enough, where society makes you not enough. And yes, that's going to include finances. It's going to include opportunities and access to a whole lot of things that you and your children might not have now. But I'm going to tell you something. The Bible says if you can practice being content with yourself and your family just as you are, and pursue godliness and righteousness instead, there's great gain in it. Not only does God empower you for the moment, but I've also seen Him use it to lead you into greater things. Remember the God we serve. He promises that the race is not to the swift, not the victory of the battle to the strong, but it is God who takes one person, sets them on high, and takes another person from high and places them low. So I want to encourage you today, please, as you go forth, don't let the mindset be grasping to prove to the world that you're successful. You don't need that. What you need is to teach yourself and your children the ability to find contentment with your current resources, where you are, to live life on a daily basis with gratitude for what you have for yourselves right here, right now. Thank you for tuning in today. And single mom communities, please share this with your single mom communities. And please also try to be an encourager. Don't be someone who puts single moms down for the things they can or they cannot do. In order for single mom families to operate successfully, we got to learn how to draw boundaries and say no to a lot of things that you all who are in two-parent homes or who do not have children, you have the availability and their time to do so many things that although we would want to do, we cannot and we should not for the success of our families. Go ahead and be the champion of single moms. When you see single moms who are living modestly, just keeping it together, how best they can, be a champion for them, support them, encourage them, pray for them, and love them. Thanks for listening today, and please share this, and I will be with you next week. Thank you. God bless you.